Ailey Readers. Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley. Copyright Ailey 2009. Chapter 1. A Mysterious Visitor. Letter 1. To Mrs. Saville, England. St. Petersburg, December the 11th, 17. My dear sister, you will be pleased to learn that I arrived in St. Petersburg safely yesterday. You do not need to worry any more. I am confident that my expedition to the North Pole will be a success in spite of the dangers. I feel the north wind here, and the smell of it increases my excitement at my new adventure. I'm going to a place where the sun does not set, where I will discover a new and wonderful land, where I can carry out experiments to find out how compasses work. It is a dangerous, unknown land, but I feel as happy and safe as a little child setting off in a boat on a lake. One day, dear Margaret, one day I will be famous. I am so grateful for your love and kindness. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. Letter 2. To Mrs. Saville, England. Archangel, 28th of March, 17. Everything is ready for my expedition to the north. I have hired a whaling boat, have an excellent crew, and as soon as the weather improves, will set off on our historic voyage of discovery. There is one thing missing, however, and it makes me suffer. I do not have a friend to share the difficulties and excitements of my journey with. I am hopeful of success, but ask you to remember me with affection if you never hear from me again. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. Letter 3. August the 5th, 17. Something so surprising and strange has happened to us since my last letter to you. The southern gales made our journey to the north quicker than I expected, but our ship has been almost completely stuck in the ice for the past 2 days, and the crew and I are beginning to become very worried. There is nothing we can do but wait. Yesterday afternoon, the mist lifted, and we had a clear view of the huge areas of ice around us. Suddenly there was a shout from one of the crew. We ran to him and looked to where he was pointing. There, only half a mile from us, a gigantic figure wearing furs was riding at full speed on a sledge pulled by 8 dogs. We watched him as he disappeared towards the north. Last night, the ice around the ship broke, and we were free to continue our journey. Next morning, when I woke up, I saw the crew pulling something up onto the ship from the ice below. To my surprise, I saw a man, thin and ill from the cold and lack of food. He spoke English but had a European accent. What was even stranger, in my view, was that he only allowed us to bring him onto the ship when I told him we were searching for the North Pole, because that was where he wanted to go too. When I looked over the side of my ship, I saw his sledge was half broken, and only one of his dogs was left alive to pull it. After that, he collapsed and we carried him to my cabin. We looked after him as well as we could, but he was very weak and I was worried that he would die. His eyes gave an expression of wildness, even madness, but he is so grateful for everything we do for him. He gives us the sweetest smiles. It was many days before he was well enough to speak to us. We had a lot of questions to ask him. Why have you come so far north on that strange sledge, risking your life in this way? I asked. I am following someone who is running away from me, he replied. Is this person also travelling on a sledge pulled by dogs? I asked. and when he nodded, I told him of the gigantic man we had seen. "That is him," the stranger said. The stranger became agitated. He wanted to go immediately on deck and look for this giant man on his sledge, but he was still too ill and I would not let him, though it took me all my strength to stop him. I told a member of the crew to watch for the gigantic man instead. August the 13th, 17. During the time I have spent with my strange guest, I have begun to like him more and more. In fact, he has become my very good friend. He speaks so well, is so educated, seems to know so much. Now that his health has improved, he spends as much time as he can on deck, looking for the sledge and the gigantic traveller. There is one thing which really worries me. He seems more unhappy than anyone I have ever seen. He spends his days lost in misery. I cannot imagine what has happened to make him so sad. To make him feel a little better, I told him how happy I was to have him as my new friend. "Yes," said the stranger. "A friend is indeed a great gift. I had a friend once, the best friend a man could wish for. I envy you, Captain Walton. You have hope, your whole life in front of you, but I have lost everything. All that I have left is despair." He became extraordinarily agitated, and his face was full of grief. Yesterday, the stranger said to me, "You see how much I suffer, and of course you are curious about why. Before I met you, I had decided that my terrible story would die with me and remain a secret. I have changed my mind. You have told me of your expedition to the North Pole, your great desire for knowledge. But I hope with all my heart that in your search for knowledge, you do not make the same mistakes as I have done. I do not want your story to end in tragedy and evil as mine has done. I hope that my tale may serve as a warning to you." He has promised to start telling me his story tomorrow. I feel sure it will be terrible and tragic. I have decided to write it down for you in this journal, dear sister. I am impatient for this story to begin. Victor's story. I come from an important and well-known family in the city of Geneva in Switzerland. I had a happy childhood. My mother and father loved each other very much. After they were married, they travelled in France, Germany, and Italy, where I was born, in Naples. My first memories are my mother and father's love for me. I was an only child for many years. I was the centre of their world, and they taught me above all to be patient, kind, and to have self-control. My mother was very happy, but often said how much she wanted a daughter. My mother liked to help poor families, and would visit them when we travelled to give them money. It was on one of these visits that she found a child who had the most beautiful blonde hair. Indeed, her hair was of the brightest gold. She looked so adorable and sweet. My mother asked the family about this child. When she discovered that the child's parents had died, and that these poor people were only looking after her, my mother persuaded them to let us take her to our home to live with us. The next day, my mother said to me, "Victor, I have a surprise for you. A pretty present." And so it was that Elizabeth Lavenza came to live with us as part of the family, and she became my adored playmate, sister, and companion. Elizabeth and I were almost the same age, but our characters were very different. She was calm and poetic, and I wanted to find out how things worked. From an early age I looked at the world with the eyes of a scientist, and more than anything, I wanted to understand the hidden laws of nature. When I was 7, my mother gave birth to a son, and sometime later to another boy. My family decided to live permanently in Geneva. I was not happy about this, as I did not have many friends there. I preferred to be alone. I did have one good friend, though. He was heroic, loved danger, and was a wonderful storyteller and writer. His name was Henry Clerval. No one could have had a happier childhood. I was full of energy and had a strong temper, but Elizabeth always found a way to calm me, and in time I learnt to put all my energies into my scientific studies. I did not go to school, but instead studied the books in my father's library. I was free to choose what I read. My father was not scientific and did not follow me in my studies. By chance, I started to read the scientific texts of ancient Greece. At the time, no one explained to me that the ideas in these books were completely wrong and that modern science had made many new discoveries. I was fascinated by what I was learning and did not realize I was wasting my time. One night, when I was 15, something happened which made me abandon the ancient Greeks. There was a terrible thunderstorm over the mountains of my home. Lightning lit up the mountains, thunder echoed around me. I was standing watching this incredible sight from the front door of our house, when suddenly I saw fire coming out of a beautiful old oak tree which stood close to the front of our house. It had been struck by lightning. When we went to inspect the tree next morning, there was nothing left but a black stump. It had been completely destroyed. Until then, I had not studied the laws of electricity, but a scientist friend of my father was staying with us then, and he told me everything that science had discovered about electricity at that time. I was fascinated and excited by what I heard. From that time on, I threw all my old study books away and studied only subjects relating to mathematics. I thought that these were the only things worth studying. My life was changed by lightning striking a tree. Although at the time it seemed such an unimportant event, it was to lead to the complete destruction of everything I loved. When I was 17, my father decided I should go to study at the University of Ingolstadt. However, before I could leave, the first of the great tragedies of my life occurred. I should have seen it as an omen, should have realized that my life was doomed. Elizabeth became seriously ill with a terrible infection. We begged my mother not to visit her. However, when it seemed as if Elizabeth might die, my mother insisted on looking after her. In fact, Elizabeth did recover, but it was my mother who then caught the disease and died of it in only a few days. We were all devastated by her death. It came to the time when I had to leave to go to Ingolstadt. My friend, Henry Clerval, had asked his father if he could come and study with me, but his father had refused, and so I had to go on my own. I was not at all happy about leaving my father, Elizabeth, and my two brothers, my dear Clerval, so soon after the death of my mother. For the first time in my life, I found myself alone. Once I arrived at university, I started to organize my new life. I found somewhere to live, and I began to study with some of the most intelligent men of the age. I studied all aspects of science. Chemistry in particular I found of great interest. One of my favorite teachers was Mr. Waldman, a professor of chemistry at the university. One day, I was sitting listening to one of Mr. Waldman's lectures when he said something which I can remember to this day. "Scientists are able to perform miracles," he said to us. "They are uncovering the deepest secrets of nature. They are showing us how things work. They have discovered how the blood circulates around the body, and we now know so much about the air that we breathe. Through their hard work and the discoveries they have made, they have gained new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, make the earth shake. Nothing is beyond their capabilities." Such was the effect of these words that I did not sleep at all that night. The next day I went to visit Mr. Waldman and told him of my strong desire to study chemistry. He talked to me about the wonders of chemistry and gave me a list of books to study. When I left him that day, I was filled with ambition, inspired by my wonderful teacher. I decided that in my life as a scientist, I would do so much more than those who had gone before me. I would find a new way to explore the unknown powers of science. I would show the world the mysteries of creation. And so ended a day I will never forget. It was the day that decided my destiny. Chapter 3. The most unhappy of all men. My journey home to Geneva was terrible. At first, I wanted to get back as quickly as possible so that I could console my family. After all, I had been away for 6 years. But then I became afraid. I was afraid of something that I could not say. I stayed in Lausanne, where the lake was still and calm, and the mountain peaks were covered with snow. This peaceful place helped me overcome my terror. After resting for 2 days, I continued on my journey to Geneva. As I got closer to my home, I felt that I was going to become the most unhappy of all men. When you hear the rest of my story, you will see that I was absolutely right about that. I was absolutely right, except for one thing. The horror and grief that I felt at my brother's death was going to get much worse. It was going to be 100 times worse than I could imagine. It was night when I reached Geneva. The town gates were shut, and so I had to stay in a nearby village, but I could not sleep. I decided to visit the place where William's body had been discovered. To get there, I had to take a boat across the lake from where I was staying. The mountains were lit up by flashes of lightning. A thunderstorm was getting rapidly closer. As I landed on the shore, the rain started to come down in large, slow drops, and all the while the thunder rolled and the lightning flashed, lighting up the mountains around me. I reached the place where my dear brother had been found. I stopped to watch the storm, and I felt as if heaven and earth were mourning him, as if the storm was a funeral for him. I was lost in these thoughts when a sudden flash of lightning lit up a shape moving quickly into the trees not far from me. I saw it clearly. It was gigantic and deformed. I understood instantly that this was the creature, the monster that I had made in my laboratory on that terrible night 2 years before. I had a sudden, awful realization. Could he be the murderer of my brother? I started to shake. I had to lean against a tree to be able to stand up. There was no doubt in my mind. No human being could have destroyed that child. He was the murderer. As I watched, he quickly disappeared far into the mountains. No one can imagine the suffering I felt that night. At first, I decided to tell everyone the truth about the monster. But then I realized that no one would believe me. They would think I had gone mad. My story was insane. I also saw how strong and fast the creature was. It would be almost impossible to catch him. It was for these reasons that I decided not to say anything to my family about what I knew. It was very early in the morning when the servants let me into the house. I sat in the library waiting for my family to wake. It was my brother Ernest who found me first. He was in tears when he saw me. Seeing my brother so upset, the truth of the situation hit me for the first time. "You must help Elizabeth," he said. "She really believes it was all her fault. But now that the murderer has been discovered, it is Justine, our friend, who is accused of William's murder." "Justine!" I cried, astonished. "That poor, poor girl. But surely everyone realizes it could not be her. Everyone must believe she is innocent." "We thought so too, dear brother. But the pendant that William had been wearing was found in the pocket of the dress she had been wearing on the night of the murder." "You are all wrong," I said. "Justine is innocent. I know the murderer." At that moment, my father came into the library. He seemed old and weak. He was soon followed by Elizabeth. "I am so glad you are here, Victor," she said. "You give me hope. I am sure that Justine is innocent. There has to be another explanation." "I agree with you, Elizabeth," I said. "She will not be found guilty, I am sure of that." But in my heart I was not convinced. Who would believe my story? Justine's trial began later that day. She sat quietly in her seat, dressed in mourning clothes. When she saw us all in the courtroom, she looked as if she was about to cry. Justine was questioned for a long time about the night of the murder, but to the people sitting in the court, her story did not seem believable. Justine had been at an aunt's house. On her way back home that evening, she had discovered that William was missing and immediately joined the search. As night fell, the town gates were shut, and she had to spend the night in a barn. She had no idea how the pendant had got into her pocket. "I have no way of explaining it. I did not take it, and I have no enemies. I know no one who would deliberately try to make me seem guilty of this crime." The feeling in the court turned against Justine during the trial. Elizabeth was the only person to say what a good person Justine was, how she believed her to be completely innocent. I could not bear to be in the courtroom another minute, and quickly went back home. The next morning, after spending a hellish night, I returned to the court. My lips and throat were dry and I could hardly speak, but I found out what I had been most afraid of. Justine had been found guilty and was to be hanged for murder. I felt sick. I tried to convince the men at the court that she was innocent, but I could not change their minds. How could I begin to tell them the truth? They would have thought I had gone completely mad, and I would still not have saved Justine. The next day, Justine was hanged, and I entered a new level in my own personal hell. 2 innocent people, my young brother and our sweet Justine, were dead because of me. But as I began to think more clearly, I also saw that the grief and suffering of Elizabeth, my father, and all those around me was also my fault. These innocent people were all the victims of my arrogant search for knowledge. I was unable to sleep at night. I wandered around like an evil spirit, losing my reason in my grief and horror. Even when we left Geneva to go to our house in the country, I felt little improvement in my heart. I had begun my research in Ingolstadt, thinking that I was doing something wonderful. I believed that my discoveries would help the whole world. Instead, I was now tortured by feelings of guilt. I spent as much time as I could on my own. It was the only way I could find any peace at all. I lived my days in deep, dark, death-like solitude. We went to our holiday home in Bellerive. I could not bear to be with anyone, so every night I took a small boat out onto the lake. I would wait until everyone had gone to bed and set out in my boat on the still moonlit lake with the mountains around me. Many, many times I thought about diving into the silent lake and in that way end my suffering. The only thing that stopped me was the thought of how my death would affect Elizabeth and my father. I loved them both very much, and I did not want to make things worse for them. Another thought also came to me. If I died, then Elizabeth, my father, and my brother Ernest could also be attacked and killed by the monster. There would be no one to stop him. Every day I lived with the fear that I would hear that the monster had killed someone else. There was no news of this kind, but I had a strong feeling that the story was not yet over. When I thought about the monster, I became filled with rage and hatred. I would have climbed the highest mountains in the Andes to be able to throw him off the top and so free the world forever of this evil creature. I wanted to see him again, so that I could avenge the deaths of William and Justine, so that I could destroy what my hands had created. Our house was the house of mourning. Everyone was grieving and crying. There was no happiness of any kind. My father looked weaker and older by the day. Elizabeth despaired. She was no longer the happy, innocent young woman she had been. Her suffering and worries weighed her down. "When I think about the death of Justine, dear Victor," she said to me one day, "I no longer believe in the goodness of the world. She was found guilty, but I know she was innocent. I know it in my heart. If lies can look like the truth, then what hope is there left in the world? William and Justine were killed, but the murderer is free to walk the streets." These words made me ill. I had not been the one to kill William and Justine, but it was me who was the real murderer, because I had created the monster. Elizabeth saw how terrible I looked and took my hand in hers. "My dearest friend, you must calm yourself. Sometimes when I look at you there is a despair and a desire for revenge in you which frightens me. Please remember your friends around you. We love you, but we don't seem to be able to help you. If you let us love you, then all will be well." Hearing her words, I pulled her close and held her tight to me, as if I were afraid of losing her forever. Some days I did not feel too bad. I was able to live normally. On other days, the only way I could survive the way I was feeling was to go on long journeys through the mountains. On one of these trips, I decided to go away for a few days up into the valley of Chamonix. It had been one of my favorite places as a young man. On my way, I passed beautiful green fields, picturesque villages and ruined castles, until I reached my destination, where glaciers reached down towards me. I spent the night in an inn in the village and slept well after my long journey. The next day, I wandered around the village. I walked through forests of tall trees. After a time, I began to feel peace enter my heart for the first time in many months. The next day, I decided to climb up to the highest mountain in the valley, the mountain of Montanvert. After some time, I reached one of the glaciers and decided to cross it. When I reached the other side, I found shelter in a small cave and stood looking back out over the glacier. The light mist had started to lift. In the distance, I suddenly saw a huge figure jumping over the ridges and crevices of the glacier and coming straight towards me with superhuman speed. As he approached, I realized to my horror who it was. It was the creature come to find its maker. Chapter 5. Hatred filled my heart. One time, I decided to travel during the day. I was deep in the forest and I was confident I would not be seen. The sun shone and I allowed myself to relax, enjoying the landscape, and forgetting that I was a monster, I allowed myself to be happy. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I looked to the heavens to thank them for this feeling of joy. The path now went along a deep, fast river, and I heard voices near me. I stopped and hid. A young girl came running past the place where I had hidden, laughing as if she were running away from someone in a game. Suddenly she slipped and fell into the river. Without thinking, I rushed into the water and with great difficulty managed to rescue her. At that moment, the young man she had apparently been running away from appeared. He looked horrified and grabbed the young girl away from me. They ran off into the forest, and I followed. As I approached, he raised his gun and shot me. I fell to the ground, and they escaped. This was how I was rewarded for my kindness. I had risked my life to save this girl from drowning, and I had been shot as a thank you. My bitterness and anger at human beings increased every day. I swore revenge. After some weeks, my wound healed enough for me to continue my journey. 2 months later, I found myself on the outskirts of Geneva. Hatred filled my heart. I was sleeping in the woods near Geneva when I heard a young child coming towards me. My first thought was that he was so young, and maybe he would not have the same reaction to me as all the other people had. Maybe he was too young to be afraid of me. As he passed me, I took hold of him and pulled him towards me. As soon as he saw me, he covered his eyes with his hands and screamed. "Why are you screaming?" I asked him. "I do not want to harm you. I just want you to listen to me." "Let me go," he shouted, struggling to escape from me. "You evil monster! You are going to eat me and tear me to pieces. Let me go, or I will tell my papa." "Boy, you will never see your father again. You are coming with me." The boy continued, "My father is an important man. He is Mr. Frankenstein, and he will punish you." "Frankenstein," I said, astonished. "He is my enemy, the person I most hate in the world. You will be my first victim." The boy continued to struggle and shout. I put my hands around his throat to make him stop, and soon he lay dead at my feet. I looked at the dead boy and felt that his death was a great victory for me. I saw how easily I could destroy the life of the man who had created me, saw how I could make Frankenstein as unhappy as I was. The death of this boy will be the first of 1,000 things I will do to him to make him wish he had never been born. The boy was wearing a necklace. I took it off his neck. Inside the pendant was the portrait of a beautiful, gentle-looking woman. For a moment the picture calmed me, but my mood changed again. She was a reminder of what I would never be able to have, a wife to love. I thought how she would scream in terror if she saw me. I was furious with rage. I walked on, and soon came to a barn. Thinking it was empty, I went in. There, sleeping peacefully, was a young woman. I had a new idea. If I put the necklace into her pocket, I could make it seem as if she had murdered the boy. She would pay the price for my suffering. The hatred I felt in my heart told me I was right to punish these people. This young woman would never look at me with love in her eyes. If she woke and saw me, she would be terrified. I was pleased that I had found another way to make a person suffer. So, full of rage and hatred, I travelled to these mountains where we are sitting together, you, my creator, and I. I have been thinking a lot over the past weeks, since the murder. Sometimes I wanted to end my life. Sometimes I wanted to see you. But then an idea came to me, something that only you can help me with. I want you to make me a companion who will live with me. She must be as horrible and deformed as I am. You will do this for me.
You have no choice. You must create a female for me, who will live with me as my wife and companion. Only you can do this, and you must not refuse me."
"I will never do what you ask," I said. "You can threaten me as much as you like, but I will never create another evil monster who would murder people like you do."
"You are wrong," said the monster. "It is true that I am evil, but I have only done these bad things because my life is so terrible. I do not feel guilty about murder. Think about this. If you killed me, you would not even think of it as murder. If humans were kind to me, I would be gentle with them. I would not want to kill anyone. But be warned. If I cannot make people love me, then I will make them be afraid of me. And you, my creator, will be the most afraid. I will destroy you and everyone around you. I will make you hate your life." "If you agree to make me a female," he said, seeing that I was changing my mind, "I promise you that no human being will see us again. We will go far away, maybe to the forests of South America, where we can live in peace."
I was not sure I could believe the monster's promises, and I was not sure if what he asked was a good or a bad thing. But when I thought about his story and how he had been treated since his creation, I felt sorry for him. In the end, I made my decision. I had to help him, had to give him a bit of happiness. The creature left, and I travelled back home. My family were worried about me and kept asking me if there was a problem, but I did not tell them about what had happened to me up in the mountains of Chamonix. Days and weeks passed. I was anxious, worrying about the promise I had made. I was too afraid to start my work, but I was also worried about what the monster would do if I did not make him a female. I knew it would take me months of work, and when I thought about making this second monster, I felt sick. In the meantime, I heard of a teacher in England who I thought might be able to help me, but still I delayed. I was afraid of taking this first step towards making a second monster. I became ill again, and spent my days out on the lake in my boat, where I found peace in the gentle breeze and beautiful landscape around me. I could not put it off any more. I had to make a decision. One day, I found my father in his library and asked his permission to travel. "My son," he said, full of love and affection for me, "I have always hoped that one day you would marry Elizabeth. It would make me so happy after all the terrible things that have happened to us. Does this journey mean that you do not love her? Does it mean that you think of her as your sister and no more?" "My dear father," I replied, "you do not need to worry. I love Elizabeth with all my heart, and my hope has always been that one day we would get married. I will only be away for a few months, maybe a year, and when I come home, we will be married." My father agreed to let me go, hoping that when I came back, I would be well again. Elizabeth was upset, but because she loved me so much, she too let me go. Without telling me, my father arranged for Clerval to meet me in Strasbourg. I admit I was worried about leaving my family with the monster free, but he had promised to follow me wherever I went. I thought he would follow me to England. After some time in London, Clerval received an invitation to go to Scotland. My friend was excited about exploring somewhere new, and I wanted to see mountains and streams again, so we accepted the invitation. Clerval was enjoying every minute of our journey, but each day I became more and more worried about what the monster could do to my family. So much time had passed since my conversation with him that he might commit some terrible crime to force me to start on my work. I told Clerval I had to spend some time on my own. He was unhappy about this, but accepted my decision. I left him to travel to his friends in Scotland. I had never felt so alone in my life. I decided to find a remote part of Scotland where I could carry out my terrible task in secret. I chose one of the Orkney Islands on the northwest coast of Scotland. It was perfect. After many weeks, my work was nearly finished. I was excited, but also had a strong sense that I was doing something truly terrible. One evening, I sat in my laboratory. The sun had set, and the moon was rising above the sea. It was too dark for me to work. 3 years before, I had created a monster who was violent and evil. And here, after all that time and all that had happened, I was about to create another one. What would this new creature be like? She might agree to live with the monster, but she might not. She might hate the monster, and then the situation would be worse than before. Up in the mountains of Chamonix, I had agreed with the monster. At that time it had seemed the right thing to do, but when I thought about it now, I began to see how terrible my promise was. People in the future might curse me as the creator of these new and terrifying creatures who only wanted to destroy and murder everything they saw. I was thinking about all of this when suddenly I looked up. There, in the window, was the monster. On his face was a terrifying smile. His face was full of evil, hatred, and violence. I wondered what madness had made me promise this terrible thing to the monster. Trembling with fear, I went over to the body of the female monster, and I did what I knew I must do. I broke her into pieces until the thing I had spent so long making lay completely destroyed around me. The monster watched me as I did this, and when I had finished, he howled with evil despair, disappearing into the night. I locked the door of my laboratory and went into my room. I was alone. There was no one who could help me. Some hours later, I heard a small boat arrive at the shore. I heard footsteps approaching the cottage, and I started to tremble with fear again as the door to my room opened. It was the monster. "Why have you broken your promise?" he said. "Why have you taken away all my hope? I will make you regret this. Am I the only creature in this world not to have a wife? By destroying her, you have destroyed any hope I had. I promise you that because of what you have done, you will live the rest of your life in fear and despair." As he turned to leave, he said, "Remember this. I will be with you on your wedding night." He quickly went back to his boat and disappeared into the black night. Chapter 7. The Wedding. My father and I arrived in Paris. It quickly became clear that I needed to rest. The sea journey from Ireland had tired me. My father looked after me well, did everything for me that he could, but he did not know why I was suffering like this. How could he? I had not told him anything about what had happened. My father thought that I should go out, enjoy myself, meet people. The problem was that I hated being with people. I hated the people I met. No, that is not true. I did not hate them. It was more complicated than that. In reality, I felt I did not deserve to spend time with them. I had created a monster who would happily kill any of them, who had promised he would make my life a living hell. The people I met did not know that I had done this terrible thing. In the end, my father stopped trying to get me to go out and meet people, but he still did not understand why I was so depressed. He thought that I had been upset about being charged with the murder of my friend Clerval. He thought that my time in prison had damaged me, that my pride had been hurt. "You do not know me well, dear father," I said to him. "I do not feel pride, not after the things I have done. Poor Justine was as innocent as I was. She died for it, but I was the one who caused her death. I murdered her. William, Justine, Henry, their deaths were all my fault." During my time in prison in Ireland, my father had heard me say this type of thing many times. Sometimes he wanted to find out why I said that their deaths were my fault. Other times he thought that during my illness, the time of my insanity, that my imagination had made me believe that I was guilty. Poor man. I could not tell him why I said these things. I did not tell him about the monster I had created. I kept it all a secret, mostly because he would think I was completely mad, but also because he would have been horrified and frightened to death. Many times I was tempted to tell him everything, but each time I stopped myself. Eventually, my father became convinced that I had lost my mind. He did not talk about what had happened in Ireland, tried to make me think about other things. And so, as the weeks passed, I did become calmer, but do not think that I became happier. I still blamed myself for the deaths of my brother Justine and my dear friend Clerval. A few days before leaving Paris, I received a letter from Elizabeth. "My dear Victor, I was so happy to hear from your father that you are now in Paris. If all goes well, then maybe I will see you again in only 2 weeks. The winter has been miserable. I was so worried about you. I hope with all my heart that you are beginning to find some peace. I wanted to write to you before you return to Geneva because there is something important that I have to ask you. Since we were children, your parents always said that one day we would be married, and I believe we did love each other as children do, but perhaps your feelings have changed now. Perhaps you do not want to marry me, but you feel you have no choice because it is what your father wishes. Perhaps you feel that you have a duty to marry me. I think that this might be one of the reasons that you have been so ill. Tell me, Victor, truthfully, have you fallen in love with someone else? You have been away for so long, studying, travelling, that perhaps you do not love me. I have to tell you, though, that I love you. I have always dreamt of marrying you, but your happiness is more important to me than anything else. If you married me and did not love me, then I would be the unhappiest person alive. If you are happy, my friend, then I will be happy too, whatever your decision. I hope that this letter has not upset you. I do not need a reply before you come back. I simply hope that when I see you in Geneva, I will see a smile on your lips. That will make me as happy as I can be. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, May the 18th, 17. While I read this letter, I suddenly remembered what the monster had said to me that night in Scotland when I had destroyed the second creature. "I will be with you on your wedding night." The monster had promised to destroy every possibility of happiness that I had. He had promised to kill me on my wedding night. Well, I thought, let him come and attack me. Let him try to kill me. I will defend myself. If he kills me, then at last I will be at peace. My sufferings will end. And if I kill him, then I will be a free man. Sweet and beloved Elizabeth. I read and reread her letter and began to hope that I could once again feel love and joy, but I knew in my heart that this could never be. The sooner I married her, the sooner the monster would try to kill me. I might have only a few minutes of happiness and then die. If I delayed the wedding, however, the monster might start killing again, just as he had killed Clerval. This would have been too terrible, and so I decided to get married as soon as possible. I might die, but at least no one else would. I wrote back to Elizabeth. I do not expect to feel happy ever again, but you must believe that you are my only hope of happiness. Please stop worrying. I want above all to dedicate my life to you, to be with you always. I too have something I have to tell you, I continued. It is so shocking and terrible that I am afraid to tell you, but when we get married, I do not want there to be any secrets between us. So, even though what I will say to you will horrify you, I must tell you. Until that time, my dear Elizabeth, be calm. I will be home soon. A week later, we left Paris and we were home in a few days. Elizabeth greeted me with love and affection, but there were tears in her eyes when she saw how thin I was and how much I had suffered. She too was thinner and quieter than I remembered, and she had lost some of the happy innocence of her youth, but she was still as gentle and kind. It was wonderful to see her, but when I thought about the events of the past years, I became insane with grief. I felt a mad rage. Other times I was so depressed that I could do nothing. I would sit for hours not looking at anyone or anything, not talking to anyone. Elizabeth was the only person who was able to help me. My behavior was very difficult, and it made her suffer too. Poor Elizabeth. My father hoped that time would heal me, and that, once married, the arrival of children would make me forget the things that had happened. I could not tell anyone the words that I heard in my head every minute, every day. I will be with you on your wedding night. I was not afraid of dying. In fact, if I died it would be a good thing, because then I would be free from this torture, this life which was so painful to me. And so, Elizabeth and I arranged to be married in 10 days. If I had known the real intentions of the monster, if I had known that instead of making my death come more quickly, I was hastening the death of someone I loved dearly, then I would have left my home immediately. I would have moved away from everyone I loved. I would never have married my dear Elizabeth. As the day of our wedding got nearer, I began to lose all hope. I did my best not to show my true feelings, but Elizabeth could see that I was not happy. We spent all our time preparing for the wedding. Friends and relations came to visit us to congratulate us on our happiness. Everyone who visited us looked so happy for us. How far they were from the truth. Before they died, Elizabeth's parents had bought a small house on the shores of Lake Como in Italy, which she had inherited. We decided that after the wedding we would go and spend a few days there in the peace and beauty of that lovely lake. In the meantime, I bought as many weapons as I could, so that I could defend myself if the monster attacked me. I had pistols and a dagger with me at all times, and was well prepared for an attack. This all helped me feel a little calmer, and I began to look forward to the wedding. After the wedding ceremony, there was a big party at my father's house. Elizabeth and I then set off by boat to spend our first night as husband and wife in a hotel at Evian. It was a lovely day. The wind was gentle, the sun was shining. Everything seemed perfect as we sailed towards Evian. Believe me, when I tell you that those were the last moments of happiness I ever felt in my life. I took Elizabeth's hand in mine and said, "You are sad, my love, but if you knew what has happened to me, and what I fear will happen in the future, you would see how precious this one day of happiness is for me." "I am worried about you, Victor, this is true," she replied, "but I will try my best to be happy. I will try not to listen to that little voice inside me, which tells me that something terrible is going to happen. Look, Mont Blanc looks so beautiful, and here, look at the fish in the lake. The water is so clear you can see right to the bottom. Everything around us is perfect." Elizabeth tried so hard to be happy. She would find something to distract her for a few minutes, but I saw how quickly the worry returned to her face. We arrived at Evian when it was getting dark, and as we landed, I felt again the fears and worries which I would feel for the rest of my life. We walked for a time along the shore of the lake, enjoying the evening light. We watched the colours change on the mountains and the lake, and as the light went, we could still see the shapes of the mountains above us in the moonlight. We went back to the inn where we were staying that night. The wind started to blow violently from the west, and it began to rain heavily. I had been calm during the day, but as soon as it was dark, I became very nervous. I thought I saw things moving in the shadows and reached for my pistol many times. Every sound made me jump in fright, but I was determined to defend myself, to do everything I could to kill the monster. Elizabeth also became afraid. "What is it, Victor? What are you afraid of?" I answered, "Do not worry, my love. All will be well after tonight. We just have to get through tonight." I felt that the hour of my death was getting closer and closer. I did not want Elizabeth to see me die, and so I sent her to bed, telling her I would join her soon. I wanted to find out where my enemy was before going to bed myself. She left me and went to our room. I spent some time walking around the inn, looking for any place where the monster could hide. There was no sign of him, and I had started to hope that he was not there, when I heard a terrible scream. It seemed to come from the room where Elizabeth was sleeping. I heard a second scream and rushed into the room. There, lying lifeless on the bed, her arms and legs twisted, was my beloved Elizabeth. Since that moment, all I can see in my mind is her pale skin, her hair covering her face, her lifeless body lying in front of me. I was in a state of terrible shock and fell down unconscious onto the floor. When I recovered, I found myself in a different room, surrounded by people from the inn. They looked horrified. I went back to the room where the body of the person who had been my dear wife now lay. She had been moved, her body straightened, and a scarf had been put over her face and neck. She looked peaceful, as though she was asleep. But when I held her, I felt how cold she was. I knew beyond all doubt that she was dead. On her neck, I saw the marks that the monster had made as he had strangled her until she had stopped breathing. With a feeling of horror that I cannot describe, I saw the monster looking at me from the window. He had an evil grin on his face as he pointed at the body of my dead wife. I ran over to the window, and taking my pistol I fired into the night, but he had gone. He had dived into the lake. Several boats went out onto the lake. They used fishing nets to see if they could find him in the water, but after several hours we returned to the inn. All hope had gone. Chapter 9. Journey's End. Walton's Journal, August the 26th, 17. Now that you have read this story, dear Margaret, do you feel the same sense of horror, the same feelings of terror that I do? I have written the story down as a single narrative, but it was not like that when he was telling it to me. Sometimes he was not able to continue his story and had to stop speaking. He was in agony, both physically and mentally. Other times his voice became broken and piercing, and through the words he was trying to say, you could hear his anguish. Other times he would tell me the most horrible things in a calm, quiet way, as if they did not upset him at all, and then suddenly, without warning, like a volcano erupting,
he would become furious with rage, and he would scream out, cursing his enemy. His behaviour was difficult to watch. His story does seem true, but I admit that if we had not seen the monster with our own eyes the day before we found Frankenstein, I would have had many doubts. Indeed, it still seems incredible to me that such a monster really exists. A few times I asked Frankenstein to tell me the methods and equipment he had used to make the creature, but he refused. Nothing I said could make him tell me anything about it. "Are you mad, my friend?" he said to me. "Don't you realize how terrible it would be if I told you? Would you also create a monster who would be an enemy of the people of this world? You must learn from my story. You are ambitious like I was, but do not make the same mistakes I did." When I told Frankenstein I had been writing down his story, he asked to see what I had written. He made some corrections, added some details where he thought I had missed out something important. "I want the story to be right," he said. A week has passed since my guest started telling me about his life. Some days I tried to comfort him, tried to make him hope again, but he says it is too late for that. I am afraid that the only way he will ever feel peace will be when he dies. There is one thing, though, that does seem to make him happy. He really believes that he sees his dead friends around him. He says that they have come to him from a different place. He talks to them, and they comfort him. He believes this so strongly that I almost believe I can see them myself. We have talked about a lot of things this week. He is extremely knowledgeable about many subjects, and I can see that before everything went wrong, he was an exceptional and intelligent man. September the 2nd. My beloved sister, as I write to you, we are in the most serious danger, and I do not know if I will ever return to England. The ship is surrounded by mountains of ice which could destroy the ship at any time. The crew are very worried, but there is nothing I can do except hope, and I never lose hope. It is terrible to think that the lives of all these men are in danger because of me. If we die, it is because of my mad idea to explore the North Pole. September the 5th. We are still surrounded by mountains of ice, and we fear death will come at any moment. Some of the crew have already died from the cold, and the other men are angry and unhappy. This morning, 5 of them came to my cabin. They told me they were worried that if by some miracle the ship became free of the ice, I would want to continue our journey north, and our lives would be at risk again. They wanted me to promise that if we escaped the ice, we would turn the ship to the south and go home. In all honesty, I have not decided what to do. To go back having discovered nothing would be awful. Instead of making some incredible new discoveries, I will return a failure. But I am afraid the men have had enough. September the 7th. I have decided. We will return south. I am coming back disappointed and having discovered nothing. September the 12th. It is over. We are coming home. I have lost any hope of making any new discoveries, and, dear sister, I have lost my friend. On September the 9th, the ice began to break up. The ship was still in great danger, but on the 11th the sea became free of ice to the south. When they saw that we were free, the crew shouted with joy. My friend became too ill even to get out of bed. When he heard the shouts of the crew, and I told him that we were turning south, he said, "You may want to give up, but I will not. I will continue my search until I die." He tried to get out of bed, but he did not even have the strength to stand on his feet. When the ship's doctor came to see him, he told me he would be dead in a few hours. I sat by his bed watching him. His eyes were shut and he seemed to be asleep. After some time he spoke again. "I have spent many days telling you my story, and during that time I have thought a lot about what I did, and I do not believe that I did anything wrong. I cannot be blamed. It is true that I created a creature, and as his creator it was my duty to make him happy. But it was much more important for me to save my fellow humans from this monster. I was also right not to create a companion for him. He was evil, and she may have been the same as him. He killed my friends, and now I have failed because I have not killed him. I am worried he will never stop killing people. Goodbye, Walton. I am grateful for what you have done for me." He looked suddenly happy. "Ah," he said, "I see the people that I love. They are with me. I am happy. Soon I will be with them again. I will be at peace." As he spoke, his voice became quieter and quieter, until at the end it completely disappeared. His eyes shut, and he lay on the bed with a smile on his lips, and not long after he was dead. "I have to stop writing now, Margaret. There are noises coming from the cabin where we have put Frankenstein's body. I must go and find out what is happening." Later. I hardly know how to write down what has just happened. I will try my best. When I went into the cabin, I saw a gigantic creature looking down at the body of Frankenstein. It was huge, terrifying. Its hair hung over its face. It was howling with grief. When it heard me come in, the monster looked up at me, stopped howling, and went over to the far side of the cabin. When I saw its face, I was frozen with fear. I have never seen anything so horrible. I closed my eyes and tried to remain calm, and I told him to stay. He looked at me in surprise. Then he turned back to the lifeless body of Frankenstein and seemed to forget that I was there. "Oh, Frankenstein," he cried, "I have killed you too. I tried to destroy you, make you suffer as much as I did by killing everyone you loved. Now you are dead and I am guilty of your death. It is too late to ask you to forgive me. You are dead and cold. You cannot speak to me. There is nothing I can do." He continued to speak to Frankenstein in this way for some time. Eventually he became quieter, and I went over to him but did not look at him. I was too terrified. "You should have listened to your own conscience," I said to him. "You should have stopped doing these terrible things. You should have chosen a different life." "Do you really believe that I thought what I was doing was right? Do you think I enjoyed killing these people?" he answered. "My heart was poisoned with hatred. I thought only of revenge. After I had killed Clerval, I went back to Switzerland. I felt terrible about what I had done. I hated myself. Then," the monster continued, "I thought about what had happened to me, about how I had suffered. I remembered how people had attacked me when all I wanted was to be friends with them. Then I became filled with hatred for the person who had created me. Hatred and revenge were my masters. I had no choice. When I killed her, when I killed Elizabeth, I tell you, I was glad, because I made him suffer as he had made me suffer. Now that he is dead, the story is finished. He is my last victim." "You hypocrite," I said to him. "You do not really feel sorry for what you have done. If Frankenstein was still alive, you would still be wanting him dead." "What you say is not true," he replied. "I was good. I looked for love and affection, and found only hatred and fear. That is what made me bad. No one saw the good in me. No one could forget how I looked. Everyone was afraid of me. I was good. But now my crimes have made me truly bad. When I think about the crimes I have committed, I can hardly believe that I did them. Was it really me who killed those people? How can I, who saw goodness in myself and everything around me, have become so evil? You have been speaking to Frankenstein, he continued, and he has told you a lot about me. I can see that you know about my crimes. But he did not tell you about how much I suffered, because he did not know. I destroyed everything around me, and it did not make me any happier. I still wanted love and friendship, but everything I did, all the crimes I committed, took me further and further away from the things I wanted more than anything in the world. Am I the only criminal in this story? Are the people who chased me away and attacked me innocent? Why do you not hate the family who lived in the cottage? The family who were so gentle with each other, but who chased me away with such violence? What about the man who shot me after I rescued his girl from the river? Is he not guilty of any crime? It is true that I have murdered innocent people who did no harm to anyone. I look at the cold body of my Creator and see how I have destroyed him. You hate me, but I hate myself more. And while I hated the man who created me, I loved him because he gave me life. My work is nearly done, but do not worry. I do not plan to kill you or anyone else. It is my own life I have to end. I will go now, and I will travel north. I will make a funeral pyre, set fire to it, and I will burn. I will become only ashes blown on the wind. I will be glad to die. I will no longer have to suffer, as I have every minute of every day since I was created. When I am dead, I will be at peace. The man who created me is dead, and soon I will also be dead. No one will remember us. No one will even remember that we ever existed. I will no longer see the stars or the sun. I will not feel the wind blowing on my face. Some years ago, when I was first created, I loved the feeling of the warm summer sun. When I heard the leaves moving in the breeze, or the birds singing sweetly in the spring, I loved life. I would not have wanted to die then, but now it is the only thing I hope for. I have done many evil things which I regret. I can only find peace in death. I am going now. You are the last human I shall ever see. Goodbye. Turning back to the body of Frankenstein, he said, Goodbye, Frankenstein. Your life became hell, but you did not suffer as much as I did. I am glad that my life will soon be over. With that, he jumped out of the cabin window onto the floating ice below. I watched him through the darkness as he was carried away by the waves, and soon I could not see him any more. He had disappeared into the icy darkness of the north.